He returned from war after 10 years, expecting celebrations. Instead, he found the human Maid in the courtyard, teaching his 12-year-old son how to kill vampires with silver and stakes. What the Vampire King didn't know, she was the only reason his son was still alive. The castle gates groaned open at midnight unannounced. King Lucien stepped through alone, his armor still caked with dried blood from the borderlands. 10 years of war had carved new lines into his face, turned his black hair silver at the temples. He moved like a shadow through his own halls, ignoring the gasps of servants who scattered at the sight of him. "Your Majesty," the steward stumbled forward. "Robes askew. We received no word of your arrival. The council, the ceremonies." Later, Lucien's voice cut through the air like winter frost. "Where is my son?" "Prince Darius should be in his chambers, my lord." "Shall I summon?" But Lucien was already walking away, his boots echoing against marble floors. He didn't head toward the royal wing. Instead, something pulled him toward the eastern courtyard, the old training grounds where he'd once taught a toddler to hold a wooden sword. The memory made his chest tighten. Darius had been 2 years old when Lucien left for war. Now he was 12. A decade stolen by duty and blood. The courtyard appeared deserted in the moonlight. Lucien almost turned back. Then he heard it, the sharp clash of steel on steel, followed by a voice he didn't recognize. Again, faster this time. Lucien moved silently to the archway and stopped dead. His son stood in the center of the courtyard, sweat plastering dark hair to his forehead. The boy was thin, too thin, with his mother's sharp cheekbones and Lucien's storm-gray eyes. But it wasn't Darius that made the king freeze. It was the woman training him. She was human, unmistakably so. No pale vampire skin or supernatural grace. Just sun-weathered brown skin, calloused hands, and eyes that burned with fierce concentration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a warrior's braid, and she moved like someone born holding weapons. In her hands, a silver blade that gleamed wickedly under the moon. In Darius's trembling grip, a wooden stake, freshly carved and deadly sharp. "The heart," the woman shouted, circling the boy like a predator. "You hesitate, you die. Show me where you'd strike." Darius lunged forward, stake aimed at her chest. She sidestepped easily, too fast for a normal human, and swept his legs. The boy hit the ground hard. "Sloppy," she said, but not unkindly. She offered her hand. "A vampire won't give you a second chance. What's your mistake?" "I telegraphed my movement." Darius took her hand, wincing as he stood. "I should have fainted left." "Good. Now, silver or wood?" The boy didn't hesitate. "Silver for the heart. Stops regeneration. Wood through the spine. Pins them in place. And if you're facing multiple targets, throat first. Even vampires can't fight while their head's hanging by a thread." Lucien's hands curled into fists. His son, his heir, was reciting vampire-killing techniques like a trained hunter. And this human woman was teaching him with the calm efficiency of a master sergeant. The woman tossed Darius a canteen. "Drink. Then we practice the arterial strikes." "Elara?" The boy's voice cracked. Do you think he'd be proud if he saw me now?" "Elara." So that was her name. The woman, Elara, was quiet for a moment. Then she knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "Your father is a warrior king, Darius. He survived 10 years of war. You want to know what would make him proud?" Darius nodded, desperate. "Surviving. No matter what it takes. No matter who teaches you," she squeezed his shoulder. "The world doesn't care if you're a prince. It only cares if you're strong enough to stay alive in it." Something in Lucien's chest twisted painfully. This stranger understood something fundamental about survival that his entire court had forgotten. Darius wiped his eyes quickly. "Again. I want to go again." Elara smiled, a warrior smile, proud and fierce. "That's my boy. Ready position." They squared off again. This time, when Darius attacked, his movements were sharper. Faster. The stake whistled through the air, missing Elara's ribs by inches. She laughed, delighted, and countered with a blade that stopped a hair's breadth from his throat. Better. You're learning. But remember, never assume your opponent is dead until you see the ash. Darius finished breathlessly. Even then, check twice. Exactly. Lucian had seen enough. He stepped into the courtyard, his presence rolling out like a physical force. The effect was immediate. Alara spun, blade raised. Darius's face went white as bone. The wooden stake clattered from his hands. "Father?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Every servant within earshot scattered. Even the moon seemed to dim as Lucian walked forward, each step measured and deliberate. He was still in his war armor, still wearing the blood of enemies, and he knew exactly how terrifying he looked. He stopped 10 feet away and let the silence stretch. Darius was shaking. The boy looked like he might collapse. But Alara, this impossible human woman, stepped directly between them. Her silver blade never wavered. Her stance was textbook perfect, weight balanced, core tight, ready to strike or dodge at a heartbeat's notice. She was preparing to fight a vampire king to protect his own son. "Move aside," Lucian said softly. "Dangerously." No, her voice was steady as stone. "You dare." "I dare." Alara's eyes met his without flinching. "You want to punish someone for this?" "Punish me." The boy was following my orders. "Alara, don't." Darius tried to push past her, but she held him back with one arm. Lucian studied her. Really looked. This wasn't some reckless servant playing at rebellion. This was a trained fighter who'd calculated her odds and decided a child's safety was worth dying for. "You teach my heir," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "to murder his own kind. I taught him to survive his own kind." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over both their heads. Behind them, guards finally came running, weapons drawn. They surrounded the courtyard in seconds, waiting for the king's command. One word from Lucian, and this woman would be dead before dawn. Darius was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. "Please. Father, please." "She's saved." Silence. Lucian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at his son, truly looked at him for the first time in 10 years. The boy was terrified, yes. But underneath the fear was something else. Something Lucian recognized from battlefields and desperate last stands. His son had learned to fight for his life. Why would he need to? Lucian turned his gaze back to Alara. She still hadn't lowered her weapon. Brave or suicidal? Perhaps both. "Throne room," he said finally. "Both of you. At dusk tomorrow." He turned and walked away, his mind already racing through implications he didn't want to consider. The guards parted for him like water. Behind him, he heard Darius collapse into Alara's arms, sobbing with relief. And he heard her whisper, steady and sure, "You did well tonight. Your father came home. Whatever happens next, we face it standing." Lucian kept walking, but those words followed him through the dark halls like ghosts. Whatever happens next, we face it standing. When had his son learned to face death before learning to face his own father? Dawn broke blood-red over the castle. Lucian hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his study, staring at reports his council had conveniently prepared, carefully worded documents about the prince's adequate progress and satisfactory health, nothing about assassination attempts. Nothing about human maids with silver blades. Nothing about why his 12-year-old son needed to learn how to kill vampires. By the time dusk arrived, his rage had crystallized into something cold and surgical. The throne room filled quickly. Word had spread like wildfire. The king had returned, and someone was about to pay for a decade of secrets. Nobles lined the walls, their faces masks of concern that barely hid their excitement. Blood trials were always entertaining. Lucian sat perfectly still on his throne, watching them whisper. The doors opened. Alara walked in first, her chin high. She cleaned up but hadn't changed her practical clothes, leather pants, worn boots, a simple tunic. No jewelry, no attempt to soften herself. She walked like a soldier reporting to a court-martial, knowing the verdict but refusing to bow. Behind her, Darius stumbled slightly. The boy had been dressed in formal prince's attire, black silk and silver clasps, but he looked like a child playing dress-up. His eyes were red-rimmed from crying. They stopped at the base of the throne. Alara didn't kneel. The gasps from the nobles were audible. "Kneel before your king," the steward hissed. "She's human," someone muttered. "She doesn't know proper." "I know," Alara's voice carried through the chamber. "I choose not to." The room went deadly silent. Lucian leaned forward slightly. "You dare show disrespect in my own throne room?" "I show honesty," Alara met his gaze. "I won't kneel to a king who abandoned his son for 10 years and now returns to judge the people who kept him alive." The nobles exploded in outrage. Voices overlapped, calls for her immediate execution, demands for punishment, theatrical gasps of horror. "Enough," Lucian's voice cracked like thunder.
Instant silence.
He descended from the throne slowly, each step deliberate. The crowd parted. When he reached Alara, he stopped inches from her face. "You are a human maid," he said softly. "Dangerously. Yet you carry weapons forbidden to your kind. You train my heir in vampire-killing techniques. You stand in my court and refuse to show basic respect." He paused. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't execute you where you stand." "Because you want answers more than you want blood." Lucian's eyes narrowed. This woman was either brilliant or insane. "Father, please." Darius pushed forward, dropping to his knees. "Don't hurt her. I begged her to train me. She only... Did I give you permission to speak?" Lucian didn't look at his son. Darius flinched as if struck. Alara's jaw tightened, but she stayed quiet. Lucian circled her slowly, the way he'd circle an enemy before a duel. "You will answer my questions. Completely. Truthfully. Any lie, any omission, and you die. Understood?" "Understood."
Who are you?
"Really? Alara Thorne. Daughter of General Marcus Thorne." The name hit the room like a bomb. Several nobles actually stepped back. "The Butcher of Crimson Valley?" Lord Vesper breathed from the crowd. "The human general who led the massacre at..." "Yes," Alara's voice was flat. "That one." Lucian studied her with new eyes. Marcus Thorne had killed more vampires than any human in history. The war Lucian had just spent 10 years fighting was partially sparked by Thorne's campaigns. "Your father," Lucian said carefully, "tried to exterminate my entire species. My father fought a war. Same as you." Alara's hands stayed relaxed at her sides, but her body was coiled tight. "He died for it. I survived." "How did you end up here? In my castle?" "I came seeking sanctuary 5 years ago. Your council accepted me as a servant. They thought it was poetic. The butcher's daughter scrubbing vampire floors," her lip curled. "They were wrong. I came looking for the safest place a hunted human could hide." "And you ended up training my son to kill his own kind?" Lucian's voice dropped to a growl. "You expect me to believe that's coincidence? I expect you to ask your son what happened when you were gone." Lucian finally looked at Darius. The boy was still kneeling, tears streaming down his face silently. "Darius," the name came out harder than Lucian intended. "Stand up." The boy scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. "Tell me, why does a vampire prince need a human warrior to teach him to fight?" Darius opened his mouth, closed it. His hands were shaking. "Tell me, not a request anymore." "Because..." Darius's voice cracked. "Because the vampire tutors you left me with said I was too weak. Too human. They said mother poisoned your bloodline by being half-mortal, and I was proof the kingdom was failing." The throne room went silent as a grave. "When I got sick 3 years ago, the blood fever, they stopped coming to my chambers. They said natural selection would solve the problem." Darius was crying openly now. "Alara found me. She brought medicine. Human medicine. She sat with me for 6 days when everyone else was waiting for me to die." Lucian felt something crack inside his chest. After I recovered, I asked her to teach me. Darius wiped his eyes roughly. I asked her to make me strong enough that they'd never call me weak again. To make me dangerous enough that they'd be afraid to try. Try what? Lucien's voice was barely a whisper. Darius looked at Alara. She nodded once, permission and support. The boy straightened his spine. Try to kill me, father. They've tried twice. The throne room erupted. Lucien raised one hand. The throne room fell silent instantly, but the tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Nobles exchanged glances, some shocked, others carefully blank. Too carefully. Everyone out, Lucien said quietly. Except my son and the human. Your Majesty, Lord Vesper began. Out. The nobles filed out in tense silence, though Lucien caught several backward glances. They were already calculating, already spinning narratives. He'd deal with them later. When the massive doors closed, Lucien turned back to his son.
Seat.
Darius sank onto the throne room steps. Alara moved to stand beside him, close enough to touch. The boy's hand found hers instinctively, fingers intertwining. The gesture was so natural it made Lucien's throat tight. His son trusted this stranger more than his own father. Lucien pulled a chair from the side wall, a simple thing, not the throne, and sat facing them. Equal height. Less intimidating. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Alara squeezed Darius's hand once, then let go. I'll tell it. You were there, but you were a child. I saw it clearly. She stood straighter, slipping into what Lucien recognized as a soldier's report. Facts first, emotions buried. 5 years ago, I arrived at this castle with forged papers claiming to be a seamstress from the southern provinces. I needed to disappear. After my father died at Crimson Valley, the vampire lords put a bounty on every thorn. My 2 brothers were hunted down within a month. I survived by running. Why come here? Lucien asked. Why hide in the heart of vampire territory? Because no one looks for a mouse in a dragon's mouth. Alara's smile was bitter. Your council loved the irony. General Thorne's daughter washing their blood-stained floors. They thought I was broken. Harmless. But you weren't.
No.
I was waiting. Planning. And then, she glanced at Darius. Then the prince got sick. Darius picked up the thread, his voice small. The blood fever hit me hard. I couldn't keep down food. Couldn't sleep without nightmares. The court physician said it was normal, that half-blood children sometimes reject their vampire nature during adolescence. They lied to you, Alara said flatly. It wasn't blood fever. It was poison. Lucien went very still. Explain. Someone was putting silver dust in his food. Not enough to kill quickly. That would have been obvious. Just enough to weaken him gradually, make it look like natural illness. Alara's voice hardened. I caught a kitchen servant dumping it into his evening broth. When I confronted her, she panicked and named Lord Vesper as the one who'd paid her. Vesper, the name tasted like ash. He's been on my council for 30 years. He's been waiting for you to die without a viable heir for 30 years, Alara corrected. With Darius dead, the succession falls to the council's vote. Vesper had the numbers. Lucien's hands gripped the chair arms hard enough that the wood cracked. Why didn't the boys' guards report this? Because they were reassigned 3 months before the poisoning started. Alara met his eyes. By Vesper. He put his own people in place, soldiers who would look the other way or, if necessary, finish the job. I was alone, Darius whispered. Everyone who'd protected me when I was little was gone. New faces everywhere. And they all looked at me like I was already dead. Alara's jaw tightened. I smuggled him human medicine, iron supplements to counteract the silver, herbs to flush his system. I moved into the servants' quarters near his chambers so I could monitor his food. It took 6 weeks before he could stand without shaking. When he recovered, I thought we were safe. Darius's voice cracked. Then they tried something more direct. The first assassination attempt happened 8 months ago, Alara said. 3 vampire nobles, young ones, probably promised titles in Vesper's new regime, cornered Darius in the library. They said they were testing his reflexes. They had silver chains, Darius added quietly. They wrapped one around my neck and laughed while I couldn't breathe. Said if I was really vampire royalty, silver shouldn't hurt me. Lucien felt rage building in his chest, hot and vicious. I heard him choking from 2 floors away. Elara's voice went flat, the flatness of someone recounting trauma. By the time I got there, Darius was unconscious. The nobles were debating whether to throw him from the window or stage it as a suicide. What did you do? I killed one of them, no hesitation.
No regret.
Silver blade through the heart. The other 2 ran. I reported it to the council as a training accident, said the noble attacked me when I interrupted their sparring session, and I defended myself. They believed you. They had no choice. I was a human servant. The nobles were drunk and had a history of cruelty. The council swept it under the rug to avoid scandal. Elara's smile was sharp as broken glass. But they knew, and I knew they knew. We've been circling each other like wolves ever since. Lucien looked at his son. Is this true? All of it. Darius nodded, not trusting his voice. After that, Elara continued, I told Darius the truth. That being a prince wouldn't save him. That his name was making him a target. I offered to teach him what my father taught me, how to survive in a world that wants you dead. I begged her, Darius said. I didn't want to be helpless anymore. I didn't want to be the weak thing they could just erase. Lucien stood slowly, his mind racing. If this was true, if even half of it was true, then he'd left his son in a nest of vipers. Why didn't you write to me? The question came out rougher than he intended. Why not send word? I did. Darius's voice broke. Every month for the first 3 years. You never answered. The words hit Lucien like a physical blow. That's impossible, but even as he said it, doubt crept in. I received no letters from you. Nothing. I know, Darius's voice was hollow. Because they never sent them. Lucien felt the ground shifting beneath him. Who? The council. Lord Vesper specifically. Darius stood, his small frame trembling but his voice growing stronger. He told me you were too busy with the war. That bothering you with childish worries would distract you from protecting the kingdom. That a true prince would be strong enough to handle things alone. I was 9 years old, Darius continued, and now there was anger threading through the pain. I didn't know I was supposed to question the man you'd left in charge. I didn't know I was allowed to. Lucien's mind raced backward through 10 years of reports. Carefully curated updates about his son's progress. Never anything alarming. Never anything that would make him rush home. They'd controlled the information. Controlled him through distance and deception. I stopped writing after the poisoning started, Darius said quietly. What was the point? Either you didn't care, or you'd never know to care. Either way, I was alone. The words were a knife between Lucien's ribs. Tell him the rest, Elara said softly. He needs to know everything. Darius hesitated, then nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, worn soft from handling. He handed it to his father. Lucien unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, formal. Definitely not a child's scrawl. His eyes scanned the text and went cold. By order of the Regent Council, Prince Darius is hereby enrolled in the Royal Academy's Advanced Combat Program. Training will commence immediately under Master Sylvain's supervision. The date was 3 years ago. Lucien looked up sharply. Who is Master Sylvain?
A vampire combat instructeur, Elara en Sword.
One of the best. Also one of the cruelest. He specialized in breaking weak students, Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's what the older students told me. They said he'd volunteered specifically to train me. Lucien's hands tightened on the parchment. What happened? The first day, he made me spar with students twice my size. When I got knocked down, and I got knocked down a lot, he'd make me stay down. I count to 20 before I could stand. Darius's breathing quickened with the memory. He said I needed to get used to the ground, since that's where I'd spend most of my life. The other students joined in, Alara added, her voice tight. They'd trip him in hallways. Accidentally, elbow him during drills. Once, they locked him in the silver-lined storage room for 6 hours. Silver-lined? Lucien's voice dropped dangerously low. For safety, Darius said bitterly. In case a feral vampire needed to be contained. But everyone knew what it really was, a torture chamber. The silver in the walls made my skin burn just being near it. When they finally let me out, I had blisters covering my arms. Where were the guards? The supervisors? Watching, Darius met his father's eyes. Master Sylvain stood outside the door the entire time. When I stumbled out, he asked if I'd learned my lesson about vampire endurance yet. Lucien felt something dark and violent rising in his chest. And the council knew? The council arranged it. Alara's voice was ice. I found the correspondence in Vesper's office. Yes, I broke in, and no, I'm not sorry. They wanted Darius, hardened for rule. Their words. What they really wanted was to break him so thoroughly that he'd either die or become a puppet king they could control. I lasted 4 months in that academy, Darius said. Then I stopped going. I forged sick notes, hid in the library, anything to avoid it. When they threatened to drag me back, he stopped, his voice catching. Tell him, Alara urged gently. Darius pulled up his left sleeve. Across his inner forearm, barely visible against his pale skin, were 3 thin scars. Deliberate.
Parallel.
I cut myself, he said simply. Not deep enough to die, but deep enough that they had to keep me in the medical wing for observation. I did it 3 times before they finally reassigned me to independent study. Lucien couldn't breathe. His son, his child, had hurt himself to escape torture that Lucien's own council had sanctioned. That's when I found him, Alara said quietly. Really found him, I mean. Sitting in the old archives with a blade in his hand and blood on his arm, trying to decide if the 4th time should be deeper. Darius looked at the floor. She took the knife away.
Didn't yell.
Didn't lecture.
Just.
Sat with me until I could breathe again. Then I made him a deal, Alara continued. I told him that if he wanted to escape this place, really escape, not through death but through strength, I'd teach him. Not the Academy's way. Not the way that breaks you down to rebuild you as someone else's weapon. I'd teach him to be his own weapon. She taught me to fight like a human first, Darius said, and now there was pride in his voice. Humans don't have supernatural strength or speed. They have to be smarter, faster in their thinking, not their movements. They have to see the weakness and strike before the enemy knows they're vulnerable. And then, Alara added, I taught him to fight like a vampire who understands human tactics, which makes him something neither side knows how to counter. Lucien looked at them both, this broken boy and this warrior woman who'd pieced him back together with forbidden knowledge and borrowed time. Last month, Darius said, his voice steadying, they tried again. The 2nd assassination attempt. For vampires this time. All older nobles. They cornered me in the Eastern Gardens after dark. They said it was time to remove the stain on the royal bloodline. And Lucien's voice was deadly quiet. And I didn't freeze. I didn't beg, Darius straightened his spine. I fought. Alara taught me to always carry a silver knife in my boot. I got 2 of them before she arrived and finished the other 2-inch. We burned the bodies, Alara said flatly. Told the guards it was a training exercise gone wrong. No one questioned it. I think they were relieved someone else had done their job. Lucien stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against marble. He walked to the window, his back to them, his hands gripping the stone sill hard enough to crack it. His son had been tortured, poisoned, and nearly murdered. Multiple times. And Lucien had been hundreds of miles away, fighting a war, while his own court waged a quieter war against his child. Father? Darius's voice was small, uncertain. Lucien turned. His face was a mask of control, but his eyes burned with something ancient and furious. You did well, he said quietly.
You survived.
That's what matters. Darius's face crumpled with relief. Now, Lucian continued, his voice hardening to steel. Tell me every name, every face, everyone who hurt you, everyone who looked away. Alara smiled, a warrior's smile, sharp and fierce. I have a list. By dawn, the castle was in chaos. Lucian had spent the night interrogating servants, cross-referencing Alara's list with guard rotations and council meeting records. What he found made his blood run cold, not the heat of rage, but the ice of calculated betrayal. The conspiracy went deeper than Vesper. It infected half the noble houses, 3 generals, and 2 of Darius's own tutors. But when he tried to convene an emergency tribunal, the council blocked him. You've been gone 10 years, Your Majesty, Lord Vesper said smoothly, standing in Lucian's private office, surrounded by 5 other council members. You cannot simply return and upend decades of careful governance based on accusations from a human servant and a troubled child. Troubled? Lucian's voice could have frozen fire. You call attempted murder troubled? We call it unsubstantiated claims, Lady Morgaine countered. She was ancient, even by vampire standards, her face a mask of wrinkles and cold calculation. The human has admitted to killing a noble. That is a violation of blood law. She must face trial. After what I've learned, you want to talk to me about law? We want to talk about stability, Vesper leaned forward. The kingdom just survived 10 years of war. The last thing we need is internal conflict based on a child's paranoid fantasies and a human's manipulation. Lucian stood so fast his chair crashed backward. Choose your next words very carefully. The blood law is absolute, Lady Morgaine pressed. A human who kills a vampire must die.
No exceptions.
Not even for the kings.
Pet.
The other council members murmured agreement. Lucian realized with cold clarity that they weren't backing down. They couldn't. If Alara lived to testify, if Darius's claims were investigated properly, half of them would be executed for treason. Their only move was to eliminate the witnesses. The council demands a formal trial, Vesper announced. For the human Alara Thorne, charged with murder of Lord Stephen Blackwood, conspiracy against the crown, and corruption of the royal heir.
Corruption.
Lucian's laugh was bitter. She saved his life. She taught him to hate his own kind, Lady Morgaine snapped. She filled his head with human sympathies and vampire-killing techniques. She's turned the prince into a weapon against his own people. She turned him into a survivor in a court that wanted him dead. That's your interpretation. Vesper's smile was thin. The law's interpretation is simpler. Human kills vampire. Human dies. The trial is a formality. We already know the verdict. Lucian looked at each council member in turn. They stared back, unified in their certainty. You have until tomorrow night, Vesper continued. Present the human for trial, or we'll retrieve her ourselves. The law applies to everyone, Your Majesty. Even your favorites. They filed out, leaving Lucian alone with his rage and his impossible choice. He found Darius in the prince's chambers, curled on his bed, staring at nothing. You haven't eaten, Lucian observed. I'm not hungry. Lucian sat on the edge of the bed. Up close, his son looked even more fragile. Dark circles under his eyes, cheekbones too sharp, hands that trembled slightly even at rest. The council wants to put Alara on trial. Darius didn't react. I know. The servants are talking about it. They're calling for her execution. I know that too. Darius's voice was hollow. They'll kill her, won't they? No matter what you say. No matter what I say. I'm trying to find another way. There isn't one. Darius finally looked at his father, and his eyes were ancient with a pain no child should carry. I've been here for 10 years, father. I know how this works. The council wanted me gone, but they couldn't kill a prince openly. So they went after the one person who protected me instead. I won't let them. You can't stop them. Darius sat up slowly. You're the king, but you've been gone. They've been ruling in your name, making alliances, consolidating power. If you try to save her, they'll call it tyranny. They'll say you're putting a human above vampire law. Some of the generals will support you, but others won't. We'll have a civil war. Lucien stared at his son. When had this child learned to think like a politician? So, I should let her die. The words tasted like poison. I didn't say that. Darius stood and walked to his dresser. He opened the top drawer and pulled out something wrapped in black cloth. Alara's silver dagger. She gave this to me after the first assassination attempt, Darius said softly, running his thumb along the wrapped blade. Told me to keep it close. That, even if she wasn't there, I'd have a way to protect myself. He held it like a holy relic, like the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. I've been sleeping with it under my pillow every night for 8 months, Darius continued. Some nights I just hold it and remember that I'm not helpless, that someone cared enough to make me dangerous. His voice cracked. If they kill her, I lose that. I lose the only person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth saving. Darius. I won't eat, Darius said firmly, placing the dagger on the bedside table. I won't speak. I won't cooperate with anyone. If they take her, they lose me too. Not because I'll die, but because I'll stop being your son. I'll be whatever empty thing they tried to make me in that academy. Lucien felt his heart break. You can't mean that. I do. Darius met his eyes, and there was steel there now. She taught me that survival isn't enough, that you have to decide what you're surviving for. I'm surviving for her, because she survived for me. A knock at the door interrupted them. A servant entered, bowing quickly. Your Majesty, there's news. The council has arrested the human. She's being held in the West Tower pending tomorrow's trial. Darius's face went white. The silver dagger slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. Lucien stood, his decision crystallizing. Tell the council I'll be conducting my own investigation tonight. No one touches the prisoner until I'm finished. The servant bowed and left. Lucien looked at his son, saw the fear and desperate hope warring in his eyes. I'm going to talk to her, Lucien said. There's something else happening here. Something we're all missing. What do you mean? A human teaching a vampire prince to kill vampires, hiding in the heart of enemy territory for 5 years, surviving multiple council investigations? Lucien shook his head. That's not luck. That's not even skill. That's something else entirely. He headed for the door, then paused. Your blood, has anyone ever tested it? Told you what makes you different? Darius shook his head, confused. Then it's time we found out, Lucien said grimly. Because I think Alara knew something about you from the start. Something that made you worth dying for. The West Tower smelled of silver and stone. Lucien descended the spiral stairs alone, waving off the guards. They reluctantly obeyed, though he caught their nervous glances. Everyone knew what tomorrow's trial would bring. Alara sat in the center of the cell, cross-legged on bare stone. No chains, she wasn't considered dangerous enough to warrant them. Just 4 silver-lined walls and a locked door. She looked up when he entered, unsurprised. Come to ask more questions? Or just to watch me wait for execution? Lucien pulled a stool through the bars and sat. I came because something doesn't add up. Most things don't in this castle. You're Marcus, Thorne's daughter, the butcher of Crimson Valley's bloodline. You could have hidden anywhere, human territories, foreign kingdoms, remote villages where no one would know your name. He leaned forward. Instead, you walked into the heart of vampire power and stayed for 5 years. Why? Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sound without humor. You really don't know, do you? Your council never told you. Told me what? What your son is. What his blood can do. Lucien went very still. Explain. Alara stood and walked to the silver-lined wall. She pressed her palm against it deliberately. Her skin hissed and reddened instantly, but she didn't flinch. My father didn't just fight vampires, Your Majesty.
He studied them.
Obsessively. He wanted to understand what made them vulnerable. She pulled her hand back, examining the burn. He discovered something the old texts had forgotten. That centuries ago, Before vampires ruled the night, there was a human bloodline that nearly wiped your kind from existence. That's a myth. It's history. The Soulborn tribe, Alara, met his eyes. They carried a genetic mutation that made them naturally resistant to vampire influence. Silver didn't burn them. It felt warm, comfortable even. Sunlight didn't blind them. And their blood, she smiled grimly. Their blood was poison to any vampire who tried to feed on them. Lucien's mind raced. The Soulborn were exterminated 400 years ago. Most of them. But bloodlines don't disappear. They hide in the general population, diluted but not gone. My father spent his whole life tracking those genetic markers. She paused. I inherited them. So did my brothers. That's why you survived when they didn't. That's why I fought when they didn't, Alara corrected. The resistance isn't just physical, it's instinctive. We can sense vampire presence the way you smell blood. We're born knowing where to strike, how to kill. It's not learned behavior. It's written in our DNA. Lucien leaned back, reassessing everything. So you came here to hunt us? To finish your father's work? I came here to survive, Alara snapped. After my father died and the vampire lord started killing everyone with thorn blood, I had two choices, run forever or hide where they'd never think to look. I chose the latter. But you didn't just hide. You trained my son. No, Alara's voice softened. I protected your son. There's a difference. She walked back to the center of the cell and sat down again, her movements careful, measured. 3 months after I arrived, I felt it, that instinctive pull that tells me when something is wrong. I followed it to the prince's wing. Found Darius collapsed in his room, burning with fever, his veins turning black under his skin. The silver poisoning.
Yes.
But here's what your council doesn't know, what you don't know. Alara's eyes held his. Darius shouldn't have survived that much silver in his system. A full vampire would have died within days. A half-blood should have died within weeks. Your son lasted months. Lucien's breath caught. I took a blood sample while treating him. Ran every test my father taught me. Alara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Your son carries the soul-born markers, Lucien. Not as strong as mine, but they're there. His mother must have had diluted bloodline, probably didn't even know it herself. The implications crashed over Lucien like a wave. That's why the silver made him sick instead of killing him outright. That's why he's stronger than anyone realizes. Why the academy training couldn't break him. Why vampire compulsion barely works on him. I've watched nobles try to command him, and he resists without even knowing he's doing it. Alara leaned forward. Your son is something unique, a vampire-human hybrid with soul-born resistance. He's the bridge between two species that have been at war for centuries.
And you saw that.
Recognized it. The moment I tested his blood, yes, Alara's jaw tightened. I also knew what it meant. If the council discovered it, they'd see him as either an abomination to be destroyed or a weapon to be controlled. Either way, he'd never be free. So you taught him to fight. I taught him to be the weapon he chose to be, not the one they'd force him to become. Alara's eyes blazed. Your council wanted a puppet prince they could manipulate. I gave him the tools to cut his own strings. Lucien stood abruptly, pacing the small space outside the cell. His mind was racing through implications, strategies, dangers. If I tell the council about his bloodline, they'll kill him. Alara's voice was flat, certain. They'll call it mercy. Say the bloodline is corrupted. Some will want to study him, dissect what makes him different. Others will see him as proof that mixing with humans weakens vampire superiority. Either way, he becomes a threat to their power structure. And if I stay silent, they kill me tomorrow, and you lose the only person who understands what he is and how to protect it. Alara shrugged. Your choice, King. Lucien stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked. This woman who'd infiltrated his castle, saved his son, and carried the blood of his people's greatest enemy. You were born to fight monsters, he said quietly, echoing what he'd heard her tell Darius in the courtyard. Yes. And you chose to fight for one instead of against him. I chose to fight for a child who deserved better than what fate handed him. Alara stood, meeting him eye to eye through the bars. Same as you should have. The accusation stung because it was true. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Then, if I could save you, truly save you, not just delay the execution, would you keep protecting him? Until my last breath. Even knowing he'll outlive you by centuries? That eventually you'll grow old while he stays young. Alara smiled, sad and fierce all at once. I'm a soul-born, Your Majesty. We don't plan for old age. We plan for the fight in front of us. Right now, that fight is keeping your son alive long enough to decide what kind of king he wants to be. What if he decides to be the kind of king who ends your entire species? Then I taught him well enough to succeed, no hesitation. But I don't think he will. I think he's the kind of king who might actually end this war. Lucian studied her face, scarred, stubborn, absolutely certain. The trial is tomorrow at dusk, he said finally. I can't stop it, but I can change what happens after. Meaning survive the next 24 hours, Alara Thorne. Because I'm going to need you alive for what comes next. He turned and climbed the stairs, leaving her in the silver-lined dark. Behind him, she called out, What changed your mind? Lucian paused. My son keeps your dagger under his pillow like a talisman. Not because it's a weapon, because it's proof that someone saw him as worth protecting, his voice roughened. I failed him. You didn't. That deserves something better than execution. He didn't wait for her response. The trial never happened. At noon, 6 hours before the council was set to convene, a messenger burst into Lucian's study, blood-soaked and panicking. The prince, he gasped. Ambush at the eastern border. The hunting party. Lucian had him by the throat before the man could finish. Where? Darkwood Pass. They were returning from the dawn hunt when the messenger choked. 20 attackers, maybe more. Rogue vampires. They separated the prince from his guards. Lucian dropped him and ran. He found the council already assembled in the war room, their faces masks of concern that didn't reach their eyes. Vesper was coordinating guard deployments with the calm of someone who'd expected this. Because he had. Lucian saw it clearly now, the timing too perfect, the trial too convenient. They'd sent Darius on that hunting trip knowing what would happen. Mobilize every available soldier, Lucian commanded. I want search parties in that forest within the hour. Already done, Your Majesty, Vesper said smoothly. Though I fear we may be too late. The messenger says the attackers had silver chains and wooden stakes. Very organized. Very prepared. Almost like someone told them exactly where to find him, Lucian said coldly. The room went silent. Lady Morgaine cleared her throat. Surely Your Majesty doesn't suggest. I suggest nothing. I observe Lucian grab his sword from the wall mount. Every minute we waste here is another minute my son is fighting for his life. Anyone not actively searching can explain their absence at the next council meeting, assuming we both survive. He was out the door before they could respond. Darkwood Pass was 3 hours by horse. 2, if you didn't care about killing your mount. Lucian made it in 90 minutes. The forest was a massacre. 6 royal guards lay dead, their bodies torn apart with a brutality that suggested rage more than efficiency. 2 of them had been burned, probably the work of a fire mage among the attackers. Lucian tracked the blood trail deeper into the trees, his enhanced senses picking up scattered voices ahead. Fighting. Steel on steel. And then, impossible, a sound he recognized from years of war. A human war cry. He burst through the undergrowth into a clearing and stopped dead. Alara stood back to back with Darius, surrounded by 7 remaining attackers. She was covered in blood, hers and theirs, and wielding 2 silver blades that reflected the afternoon sun like captured lightning. Her prisoner's clothes were shredded, and a massive gash ran down her left arm, but she moved like a dancer in a death ballad. Darius fought beside her with desperate precision, his silver knife finding gaps in vampire armor with the accuracy she'd drilled into him. But he was tiring. A 12-year-old body could only endure so much, even one with soul-born blood. Left, Alara shouted. Darius spun and drove his blade into an attacker's knee. The vampire went down screaming. Alara finished him with a strike to the throat. 6 left. How did she? Lucian started, but there was no time. The attackers saw him and scattered instantly. These weren't mindless rogues. They were trained soldiers who knew when they'd lost the advantage. 3 vanished into the forest. 2 more tried to flank around for a final strike at Darius. Lucian killed them both before they'd taken 3 steps. His blade moved with the speed and fury of a king who'd spent 10 years perfecting the art of slaughter. The last attacker, a young vampire with noble house markings on his armor, hesitated. That hesitation cost him everything. Alara's blade took him through the heart before he could run. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by harsh breathing. Darius collapsed. Alara caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him carefully to the blood-soaked earth. "I'm okay," the boy gasped.
You're
not," Alara examined him quickly, her hands moving with battlefield efficiency. 3 broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, silver burns on your wrists. Her voice stayed calm, controlled. "You did good. You stayed alive." Darius laughed wetly, then coughed. Blood flecked his lips. "You came." "Of course I came." Alara brushed hair from his face with surprising gentleness. "You think silver bars would stop me?" "How?" Lucian moved closer, his sword still drawn. "I picked the lock an hour after you left." Alara didn't look up from Darius. The guards were too busy preparing for the trial to notice. "When I heard about the ambush, I stole a horse and rode." "You could have run. Escaped while everyone was distracted." "I could have." Now she met his eyes. "But he needed me more than I needed freedom." Before Lucian could respond, Alara's expression changed. Her head snapped toward the tree line, every muscle in her body tensing. "More coming," she said. "North side. Moving fast." Lucian heard it a heartbeat later, the sound of something large crashing through undergrowth. 4 vampires emerged from the trees. These were different from the others, older, more powerful. Their eyes glowed red with blood rage, and they moved with the confidence of predators who knew they'd already won. "Take the boy and run," Lucian commanded, moving to stand between them and his son. "No," Alara stood slowly, her blades ready. "You can't fight 4 blooded elders alone. You're exhausted from the ride, and you." One of the elders moved. Too fast. Even for Lucian's enhanced sight, the vampire was just a blur of motion and malice. Alara shoved Darius aside and met the attack head-on, her silver blade singing through air. She was fast, impossibly fast for a human, but not fast enough. The elder's claws caught her across the ribs. She went down hard, blood pooling beneath her.
No.
Darius screamed. The sound that came from Lucian's throat wasn't human, wasn't even vampire. It was something ancient and primal, the rage of a king who'd lost too much and would lose no more. He moved like death itself, his blade finding throats and hearts with surgical precision. 2 elders died before they could react. The 3rd managed to block, but Lucian's fury was overwhelming. He drove the vampire back, step by step, until his blade found the creature's spine. The 4th elder ran. Lucian let him go. He turned back to find Darius kneeling beside Alara, pressing his hands desperately against her wound. "Stay awake," the boy was pleading.
Please.
"Please stay awake." Alara's eyes were already glazing. The wound was too deep, the blood loss too severe. She reached up with a shaking hand and touched Darius's face. "Proud of you," she whispered.
So.
"Proud." Her hand fell. Darius screamed, a sound of absolute devastation. Lucian dropped to his knees beside them, his fingers finding her throat. "They're faint, but they're a pulse." "She's alive," he said quickly. "Barely. We need to move now." He scooped Alara into his arms. She weighed nothing, this warrior woman who'd saved his son twice now. "Can you ride?" he asked Darius. The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Then we ride.
Fast.
And pray we're not too late." Alara survived. Barely. The castle's physicians worked through the night, their vampire, healing magic fighting against human physiology that rejected it. In the end, it was Darius who saved her. His soul-born blood, diluted as it was, proved compatible enough for a transfusion that stabilized her. When she finally woke 3 days later, the first face she saw was the boy's. "You're crying again," she whispered, her voice raw. "You died," Darius said, not bothering to wipe his tears. "Your heart stopped twice." "Didn't take," Alara smiled weakly. "Too stubborn." Lucien watched from the doorway as his son collapsed against her shoulder, sobbing with relief. He'd watched them for hours like this, the warrior and the prince, bound by something deeper than blood or duty. The trial, when it finally convened, lasted 10 minutes. Lucien presented evidence of the conspiracy, documents Alara had stolen, testimony from guards who'd been paid to look away, and the confession of one surviving attacker who named Lord Vesper as the architect of the assassination plot. Vesper tried to run. He made it to the eastern gate before Lucien's soldiers caught him. The execution was public. The message was clear: no one touches the king's son and Levs. Lady Morgaine and 3 other council members were exiled. The rest bent the knee and swore renewed loyalty. Lucien doubted their sincerity, but accepted their surrender. Some wars you won through force, others through fear. When the council demanded Alara still face justice for killing a noble, Lucien's response was simple: "She will. I'm promoting her." The shock was audible. "The human will serve as the prince's personal guard," Lucien declared. "Effective immediately. Any who wish to challenge this decision may do so in single combat. With her." No one volunteered. But the compromise was necessary. Alara had still broken blood law, and the old families wouldn't accept her open presence at court. So Lucien found a different solution. He exiled her to the human province, officially. Unofficially, she became the prince's shadow. 5 years later, Lucien stood at the training grounds at dawn, watching his son spar with the woman who'd saved his life. Darius was 17 now, tall and lean, moving with a grace that combined vampire speed with human unpredictability. He'd grown into his power, learning to balance both halves of his nature. Alara was older, slower, her body bearing the scars of that day in Darkwood Pass. But she was still dangerous, still teaching, still pushing him to be better. "Again," she called, circling him. "You're favoring your left side. A real enemy will exploit that." "A real enemy would be unconscious already," Darius shot back, grinning. Confident. "I like it. Now prove it." They clashed in a flurry of movement, blade against blade, silver ringing in the morning air. Darius was stronger, faster, but Alara had decades of experience. She twisted inside his guard and swept his legs. He hit the ground hard, laughing. "Still got it," he admitted, accepting her hand up. "Always will," she ruffled his hair affectionately. "Even when I'm old and gray, I'll still be able to knock you on your royal backside. I'll hold you to that promise." Lucien approached slowly, not wanting to break the moment. These dawn training sessions had become sacred, the one time each day when his son could simply be a student instead of a prince. "Father," Darius straightened, wiping sweat from his face. "I didn't hear you arrive." "That was intentional," Lucien nodded to Alara. "How's he progressing?" "He's ready," she said simply. "The diplomatic mission to the human territories. He can handle it." Darius's eyes lit up. "Really? You think so?" "I know so." "You're the best of both worlds, Darius. Vampire enough to command respect from our kind, human enough to earn trust from theirs. You're what this kingdom needs." Lucien felt pride swell in his chest. His son had transformed from the terrified 12-year-old he'd found in this courtyard into something remarkable, a leader who understood both strength and compassion. The council has approved the mission, Lucian confirmed. You'll leave next month. Alara will accompany you, of course. As his shadow, Alara added with a slight smile. Officially, I'm just a human advisor. Unofficially, she patted the silver blade at her hip. Unofficially, you're the most dangerous person in any room, Darius finished.
I'm aware.
They shared a look of understanding, mentor and student, guardian and prince, family forged through fire rather than blood. The mission is important, Lucian continued. The human provinces are close to signing a lasting peace treaty. Your mother's family connections help, but it's your reputation that opened this door. My reputation? Darius looked surprised. Word spreads faster than you think. Alara crossed her arms. Stories about the vampire prince trained by the hunter's daughter. The boy who survived assassination attempts and came back stronger. The bridge between two worlds. They're calling you the Peace Prince, Lucian added. Some in our court hate it, but the humans? They're curious. They want to meet the vampire, who doesn't see them as prey. Darius was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he looked at Alara. Is this what you meant? That day you said you'd teach me to be a monster who chooses kindness. This is exactly what I meant, Alara's voice softened. You have the capacity for violence, you've proven that. But you also have the wisdom to choose peace, when it's possible. That's not weakness. That's strength. The sun was rising now, painting the courtyard in shades of gold and amber. Alara didn't flinch from it the way vampires did, her soul-born blood making her comfortable in the light. Darius stood between them, his father in shadow, his teacher and son, and Lucian finally understood what Alara had been building all along. Not a weapon, not a king, but something far more dangerous, a hope. I won't fail, Darius said quietly. I'll make this work. The peace treaty, the alliance, all of it. I know you will, Lucian clasped his son's shoulder. Because you learned from the best. He looked at Alara as he said it. She met his gaze evenly, no longer the prisoner awaiting execution, but the architect of a new future. You left him to learn from monsters, Alara said, echoing words she'd spoken years ago. I taught him to be one who can still choose to be kind. Lucian nodded slowly. And in doing so, you may have ended a war that's lasted centuries. We'll see, Alara turned back to Darius. But first, this prince needs to finish his training. One more round before breakfast. Darius groaned. You're merciless.
I'm feral.
There's a difference, she raised her blade. Ready position. As they began again, movement and laughter and the clash of steel in morning light, Lucian stayed to watch. His son and the hunter's daughter, sparring at dawn. A vampire prince who understood human fragility. A human warrior who protected vampire royalty. Proof that sometimes the greatest strength came from embracing what made you different, not hiding it. Years from now, historians would debate which moment truly ended the centuries-long war between vampires and humans. Some would point to the peace treaty signed in Darius's 19th year. Others would cite the alliance of the great houses. But Lucian knew the truth. The war ended the night a human maid chose to save a dying prince instead of letting nature take its course. It ended when a king learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to decide what you were surviving for. It ended when a boy learned he could be both monster and mercy, and chose mercy. Standing in the dawn light, watching them train, Lucian smiled. His son would be a great king. Not because he was strong, though he was. Not because he was clever, though he was that too. But because he'd learned the most important lesson of all, from a woman who'd been born to kill monsters and chose instead to raise one who could be kind. And that, Lucian thought, was worth returning home for.